Welcome to Marketing D-Coded, the podcast where we unravel the mysteries of marketing for busy business owners. Here are your hosts, Daniel Kodum and Jackie Strack.
All right. Well, welcome to another episode of Marketing Decoded with Daniel Kodum
And I am Jackie Strack.
So today we're going to talk about a very current topic. Just the other day, the federal judge came down with a ruling stating that Google is a monopoly, which most of us will probably not find that very surprising, considering they control over 90% of the search engine market. But some people are right now going, oh my God, the world is ending. Others are trying to figure out what's going to happen. And so others are like, old news. What's your thoughts, Jackie?
Well, it's obviously a big news item. I guess the reality of it is that maybe a lot will change and maybe a lot won't change. And I think that remains to be seen just based on whether or not the appeal goes through that Google's putting out and, what ends up, what basically whether or not consumer behavior changes is a big question.
So why don't you give a little bit of context, Jackie, on what the ruling is based on?
Well, it comes from a 2000 ruling about Microsoft being a monopoly. And in that case, Microsoft was forced to break up their company and also open up some of their technology so that it was open to other people and not just proprietary to them. So in this case with Google, something similar could happen where some of their tech could get unbundled and also they could be, made to break some of their exclusive partnerships that they have with certain platforms so that they're not the default search engine on phones and other things like that.
Yeah, and I think unbundle is probably a better word than break up. AT&T about over 40 years ago got broken up, which we'll talk about and put into context. But as perspective, what happens right now, billions of dollars gets exchanged with companies to ensure that these companies mark Google as the default. So when you buy an iPhone right now and you go do a search, it automatically will use Google. Doesn't mean it has to stay that way, but most people do not change their search engine in their browser. And one of the initiatives in this whole thing has been also seeing other tech companies, i.e. Apple, can they, for instance, force you to have Safari as your default browser in iPhones, or does that need to quote unquote be unbundled? And these questions are key questions in the whole stream of things of how this thing is going to play out. As we go through this over the next several years, I'm going to give you my perspective. I don't think anything is going to happen in the immediate term. I think it's going to be a period of time. We're going to have years of litigation, appeals, and Google's going to do everything they can to try to keep things going as is. Why? Because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry for them. This is their heart and soul of their company. They have other aspects, but it's their heart and soul. And it's going to take impact in two ways. First way it's going to, I think, have an impact when it's all said and done. I think it's going to impact competition. There's going to slowly, some of these outlying search engines may have a shot at being used more often and potentially generating some revenue. There is an outside chance Google could get forced to, for instance, separate their search from their ads, or maybe even forced to separate like YouTube from Google search, because YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world and it happens to be owned by Google. And similar to how Facebook and Instagram, two of the largest social medias, are owned by the same company, and they're under some scrutiny too by the Justice Department. The second way, and the one that probably isn't talked about as much, is how much the money that flows between Google and these other companies impacts their business. I was reading an article that apparently Mozilla, which is owns Firefox, the browser, 80% of their revenue comes from Google, with it being their default search engine. Well, when that much revenue is impacted, that could hurt a company. Apple, yeah, they get a lot of money from Google. But if tomorrow Apple stopped getting that money, will it hurt them? Yes, but is it going to destroy the company? Not really. It's a small drop in the bucket for a company as big as Apple. So that's where we're going to see some dynamics change, in my opinion, over the next several years. And it's going to all come down what the end result is. And I think some of that is going to be based on a couple things that not necessarily are going to be on top of mind, one of them, but the other one is definitely top of mind, at least for the next 3 months, which is the U.S. elections. Depending on who gets elected, both as president and the majority Congress, those could impact things. Democrats traditionally are more prone to have the government take a heavier hand in controlling monopolies and businesses, while Republicans are more hands-off traditionally and don't try to have the government step on the free market. And there's arguments to be made each way. I'm not going to sit there and get into the politics of it all. But if the Democrats are more in control after all this, they're more likely to keep pursuing the Googles, the Apples, Facebooks of the world and getting monopolies, quote unquote, to kind of break apart or push back on their monopolistic behavior. On the other side of the world, if Republicans get in, they are more likely to potentially settle things or let things just die down because they don't want to go down that road, because they feel the government should stay out of it. Now, besides politics, the other side of things is we are in a global economy. So other regulatory environments like the European Union could impact things. They've already impacted it. If you look at why Apple suddenly is changing all their charging ports to USB-C, well, there's technological reasons for it. The USB-C was mandated by the EU. So as a result, Apple's not going to keep two different charging ports for two different countries. They're putting it forward. And they are similarly going after the Googles, the Apples, and there's changes already coming to the app stores for both Google and Apple because of those regulations. And that similarly could impact search engines. There could be regulatory environments coming down that way. So there's a lot of factors, and just one court ruling isn't going to necessarily be the end-all be-all, but it is showing a sign of a direction that may be heading where what we know now may not be what's there in 5 years. It's probably exactly what it's going to be there in a year, but there's a direction that we just have to be on top of. What's your thoughts, Jackie?
Well, the whole conversation about the global worldview and also the regulations coming from Europe makes me think of the cookies situation and how privacy is a concern globally for everybody now, kind of more than ever. And the fact that if Google does stop being the predominant search engine, it might clear the way for some other ones to come forward that are more conscious of privacy and maybe catering to that desire to have less information revealed about searchers and visitors. And that makes me think about how marketing would be impacted. You know, regardless of what happens with Google, marketing is going to be impacted some way, because right now the status quo is such that Google owns basically the ad realm of marketing and also most of the search engine, realm of marketing, tracking. And if that changes, then marketers are going to have to be agile and kind of adjust how they're analyzing data and gathering it.
Absolutely. And I think what we'll see is we'll see softwares adapt to account for multiple points of entry. We use a software called Agency Analytics, which gives us Bing data, but all in all, we usually don't pay as much attention to it just because it's a small portion, that less than 10% of the volume. But as things change, I think you'll see that there's more views on that, but there will also probably become more conformity in how things are analyzed and stuff. And at the end of the day, I think it's going to come down to the same things that marketing is about these days: increasing your online visibility and having strong content. I think regardless of the search engine, regardless of where, those are the things that are going to drive it, because those are the things that consumers are looking for. Those are the things that will showcase that a business is truly a business that should be trusted. And it's we may, in a few years, who knows, maybe Yelp will be the one we're talking about, because Yelp is right up there in the top 5, and it may benefit from this because it's viewed as a more trusted source by more consumers because of the fact that they have such strong mechanisms to prevent fraudulent postings. It gets rid of some very legitimate postings, but you can't always get it perfect. But because even the FTC looks at their stuff as very reliable, consumers do too, and it could be the next thing that benefits from all this. So.
And if anything is consistent in the tech landscape, it's that there's going to be changes. So,
Oh yes.
but what doesn't change is that people want high quality content. They want high quality results. They want to know that when they search for something, they're going to get what they're looking for. So making sure that content stays relevant and stays high quality is going to help no matter what happens in the landscape.
We talked about breaking up. We talked about some geopolitical and regulatory impacts. But to me, one of the things I've found that is the most dramatic impact that leads to change is actually technology itself. I have found that every major monopoly is impacted by technology changes. Let's back up. Over 40 years ago, we had a dramatic shift where the courts found AT&T, which at that time controlled local and long-distance phone calls. For those who don't know, before cell phone, there used to be local calls, long-distance calls, and there was one company that managed it all. They broke it up into several parts and by region. Well, that's great. It was no longer a monopoly, but it was. When your local phone company was determined by where you lived, you didn't get really a choice. You went to live in San Francisco, you dealt with one company. You went to live in New York, you lived with another company. And you didn't get to choose among 3. You just found out who your local phone company is, and that's who you did. Now, long distance becomes a bunch of different players. But at the end of, and a company like Verizon grew from one of these new entities. But with that said, what truly changed the landscape was actually cell phones. Cell phones came in, and suddenly who cared about local and long distance? And cell phones initially started as, oh, you got you got unlimited, you got a certain amount of minutes in your area. Then it became unlimited calls in your area. Then it became your state. Then suddenly nationwide. Now, here we are many years later, and we have 3 long-distance carriers. Similarly, we've talked about the Microsoft situation. Well, Microsoft owned, and still to some extent owns, the PC market because their Windows is the backbone of most PCs. Well, 17 years ago, the big revolution that started the mobile market, iPhones came out. And now the phones of today are more powerful than computers of 17 years ago. And they can do things never thought we could do. I'm more on my phone than my computer most of the time. And that I'm not the exception, I'm the rule. People search on their phones about 2/3 versus 1/3 on computers. And the majority of people use either iOS, which is Apple, or Android, which is Google. Notice Windows is not there. Microsoft tried to do a Windows phone, failed miserably. So what happens now? Well, there's two players. And there's arguments to be said that in 10 years, phones will be taken over by cars, or who knows, the chip in a brain that, what's that coming, Neuralink that
Neuralink, yeah.
Elon Musk started? They could take over. Or even Google or Apple glasses or whatever their goggles, whatever they're going to be called. The technology is usually the thing that moves the needle. I'll do one more example. 15 years ago, all the rage was MySpace. MySpace is dead. No one talks about MySpace. Facebook then came along. Then Facebook bought Instagram. Now Instagram is hot on the trail of Facebook. And now TikTok is the new fave. It's nowhere near Facebook and Instagram's impact, but the one constant is change. The one constant is improvement. And that tends to override any sort of governmental regulatory changes or impact. These court decisions usually aren't the game changers. It's usually technology, advancements, and consumer change.
So regardless of what happens with this court case, something is going to come up that's going to change the landscape eventually.
I totally 100% agree. And I think it's going to happen sooner rather than later. And I think what we will see is we're going to see that the current landscape is going to be different as technology evolves.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what develops, what comes along to make that change.
With that said, I've kind of been speaking quite a bit today. Jackie, where do you see things going? What's your opinion?
Well, to me, Google is such a mainstay of the internet, and it's been, a fixture kind of since the dawn of the internet. And that makes me think about if Google is coming under siege, by the regulatory bodies, what's next? Is Apple, is Amazon, Meta, are these other huge behemoths going to be subject to the same scrutiny? And I'm just curious, basically, assuming that nothing huge happens in the next year, I'm very curious to see what will be the situation in the next 5 years, how things will change, and if things will start to shake up, and if these huge kind of cornerstones of the internet are going to crumble and kind of be replaced by upstarts. And I think it's an interesting time, and there's the potential for a lot of new and innovative things to spring up.
So if you had to make a prediction, give me your 1, 3, and 5 year prediction for what's going on.
I think that probably 1 year ahead and 3 years ahead aren't going to be that different. And this specific case is probably going to be tied up for at least a year with appeals and everything like that. But in my opinion, the next, 5 years from now, something new will pop up. And maybe it'll be AI powered. Maybe it'll be similar to the Neuralink that we talked about, where, you get a phone call directly to your brain. But I think that the landscape will shift, 5 years from now. How that is, I don't know. But I do think that this case is kind of a harbinger of a shift that's kind of greater overall in the tech space, and that we'll have to keep an eye on and, be agile enough to navigate. How about you?
I would agree with the 1 year. I don't think much of anything is going to change. We're going to see a lot of companies experimenting with stuff, but as far as the actual case impacting, nothing. If anything, we'll get a initial feeling of what the judge wants to do. We might see more fines. We might see new EU suits and regulations. I mean, there's already other lawsuits out there by the Justice Department against other tech giants and stuff. I think in 3 years we'll start to get some clarity as to the changes expected. I think the legal landscape will do. But I think the overall, I said this earlier, it's going to be online visibility, content is still going to roll. Because I think in 5 years, I think AI is going to be the replacement for search. I think we're going to see a more sophisticated, whether it's Gemini, Copilot, Siri, or whatever the flavor of the day will be for AI, you're going to be able to say, hey, what's a good Mexican restaurant locally? And it's going to give you the 3-4 options, and those are going to be based on the same things. Online visibility, it's going to be based on your content, and it's going to decipher it. It's not going to come up from thin air. I mean, there's going to be, as you go along, it's going to be maybe attached to more things. Like you could say, AI will get to know, oh, you like to go to X restaurant quite a bit. Hey, do you want to go there tonight? No, how about something similar? And you'll have to make interconnections to other stuff. So hopefully your business comes up. But I don't think it's going to be that Google's going to get broken up. I think Google may be forced to maybe have their advertising business separate from their search business. Things like that may happen. But that's the extreme. I think the biggest thing is I do think they're not going to be allowed to pay to have them as a default search engine. Yeah. Similar to Microsoft can't force people to have Office. And look, a lot of people use Google Docs now, Google Sheets. I know a lot of people who don't even touch Microsoft products. Is it still used by a lot? Oh, absolutely. But it's not the only game in town anymore. Just like it won't be the only game. Google won't be the only game in town probably in 5 to 10 years because there'll be other avenues. So for the business owners, the marketers, I would say just work on good content. Make sure you're visible online because it's still a function of non-paid traffic will continue to be a quarter of the cost once you have it established versus paid content. So it's still going to be the right way to do it. You just have to make sure you set yourself up to be visible regularly.
Wise words. And I think that's timeless advice.
Well, with that said, this is keep those words in mind, get some great content out there, keep showing up in the online space, and we'll catch you next time on Marketing Decoded.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast player. To sign up for your own free assessment, visit www.dcodetech.com/free-fitness-assessment.